Matthew Lapp, host of Matthew Lapp Train Guy segment show. Also today in this segment, I'm at the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin. The Mid-Continent Railway Museum is located on Museum Road and Diamond Hill Road, which is located 14 miles off the I-90, I-94 in North Freedom, Wisconsin. And to see what the hours are, do check the web. The museum began as the Railroad Historical Society of Milwaukee in 1959. In 1962, the first excursion was on the Hillsborough and Northeastern Railway's 5 miles of line between Union Center and Hillsborough, Wisconsin. Then, in 1963, the Society's growing collection moved to North Freedom, which is its permanent home, and also there are train rides given, and the line is a former Chicago and Northwestern rail line that was built in 1903, and it was originally Chicago and Northwestern's Rattlesnake Spur. A 7-mile line first opened in 1903 to serve the Iroquois and Illinois iron ore mines in LaRue, Wisconsin. Then, in 1913, after the mines closed, the track returned to use in 1918 when a quarry purchased it. Once again was abandoned in 1962. Then, in 1963, it was rebuilt, and also it became a perfect home for the newly renamed Mid-Continent Railway Museum, which bought the line and has owned it ever since. Also, the ride takes you all the way to the siding near the quarry that is abandoned, where the locomotive runs around the train and then returns to the museum grounds. The museum operates excursions on the line from mid-May to Labor Day. Also, between 1975 and 1976, a car barn was built by volunteers and housed a number of static displays. Also, the museum's collection emphasizes the preservation of railroad items operated in the upper Midwest from the period of 1880 to 1916, and is what the organization refers to as the Golden Age of Railroading. In 2008, there was a terrible flood from the Baraboo River on the museum grounds, and the museum was temporarily closed for repairs until February 2009. And the bridge that crosses the Baraboo River was closed for 10 years because of it, and it was reopened in 2018, and also in the fall that year there was a terrible flood once again from the Baraboo River, but eventually all the water was gone and cleared up, and the museum soon reopened, and some of the equipment had to be evacuated and carried off the property on the main line as well. In 2019, the new display building that was constructed in 2017 was finished. Also, the museum still continues to preserve railroad history as well. This water tower was built between 1972 and 1975 by museum volunteers, and this one had been built for the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, and it looks like a water tower that may have been used on the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad, and also it is used to fill water into steam locomotives' water tanks as well, for when there is steam operations happening at the museum as well. What you see right behind me is Sioux Line 2017. Sioux Line 2017 was built by Barney and Smith Car Company in Dayton, Ohio in 1914 and is a diner lounge car. This car was originally built as a passenger coach, and the car had plush walkover seats, electric lighting, and full vestibules. The car was updated over the years as the Sioux Line equipped it with air conditioning and removed the under clerestory window sashes. In 1948, it was rebuilt as a diner lounge car by the Sioux Line and at its Shoreham shops in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and the vestibule on the lounge end of the car was removed. Also, the car was regularly used on the Sioux Line's Laker between Chicago and the Twin Cities until the passenger train was discontinued in 1966. In that year, the car was retired, and in 1966, the car was sold to a private individual and moved to Hayward, Wisconsin, where it was stored for several years. Then, in 1971, it was resold and moved to Duluth, Minnesota, where it was completely restored to its 1948 appearance. Then, in 1978, it was then moved to the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, and leased for use in first class and dining service. It was purchased by the museum in 1996, and it is used on the museum's train and operates during special events, which are Snow Train, Autumn Color, and the Santa Express as well. What you see right behind me is Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western 563. Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western 563 was built by Pullman in 1914 and is a Boonton-type passenger coach. This car was part of an order of 77 cars built for the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad. All of the cars featured unique I-beam platform roof supports at each end, which earned them the nickname Boontons, as they were a familiar sight along the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western's Boonton branch through Boonton, New Jersey. Also, it was used in commuter service on the railroad as well, and passengers riding aboard it as well. Then later it was retired, and in 1963 it was brought over to the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, and also it can even be seen on the passenger train and people riding on board it while visiting the museum as well. What you see right behind me is Sioux Line 2645. Sioux Line 2645 was built by Alco Brooks in Dunkirk, New York in 1900 and is the 3687th steam locomotive built by that factory and is a 460 10-wheeler type steam locomotive and is an E25 class steam locomotive. This locomotive was originally built for the Wisconsin Central Railroad and originally numbered as Wisconsin Central 247. When the Sioux Line leased the Wisconsin Central in 1909, it was renumbered as Sioux Line 2645. And for many years, this locomotive was likely used as a freight locomotive for the Sioux Line and Wisconsin Central Railroad as well. Then, in 1955, it was retired and was donated to the city of Waukesha, Wisconsin, and was on display at Frame Park in Waukesha, Wisconsin. Then, in 1972, it was then moved to a railroad-themed restaurant in a former Chicago and Northwestern depot, which is a Mexican restaurant called La Estacion. Then, eventually, a realignment of ex-Chicago Northwestern track required that the locomotive be moved to, and in 1988 the Waukesha City Council therefore donated it to the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, and was moved in 1989, and in 2004 it was cosmetically restored. Also, Sioux Line 2645 is the only surviving 460 that worked the Sioux Line and Wisconsin Central Railroad and can be seen preserved here at the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, where it is seen today. What you see right behind me is Sioux Line 29967. Sioux Line 29667 was built by Haskell and Barker in Michigan City, Indiana in 1921 and is a stock car. This car was built in a number series of 400 cars numbered from 29600 through 299.99, and also it was used for many years on the Sioux Line on freight trains for many years and hauled livestock on board and also moved many loads of cattle from the North Dakota and Minnesota farm communities to the Chicago markets. Then the car was removed from revenue service and assigned to work service for transporting new ties and needed for track repairs. There is no evidence that the Sioux Line ever renumbered it into its work service series. Then the car was retired and was donated to the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin by the Sioux Line in 1971 and was restored in 1987, lettered for the style in use on the Sioux Line during the later part of the 1930s. Then, in 2004, after years of display outdoors, the car's paint job was renewed again for the Sioux Line Historical and Technical Society's convention held in North Freedom, Wisconsin, and also can be seen preserved at the museum where it is today. What you see right behind me is Duluth and Iron Range 5537. Duluth and Iron Range 5537 was built by the Duluth and Iron Range Railroad in 1897 and is a flat car. This car was used on freight trains on the Duluth and Iron Range Railroad many years ago and carried cargo such as construction machines on wheels, pipes, steel, and all other types of cargo it once hauled many years ago. Then in 1938, it was then transferred to the Duluth, Mesabi, and Iron Range through merger as Duluth, Mesabi, and Iron Range 5537. Then later on, this car was retired, and in 1963, it was purchased by the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, and in the 1980s, it had been cosmetically restored to its original rail line as Duluth and Iron Range 5537, and also it is even used in the museum's freight train at special events and is preserved at the museum as well. What you see right behind me is Union Tank Line 17550. Union Tank Line 17550 was built by Union Tank Car Company in Chicago, Illinois in 1937 and is a tanker car. Union Tank Line 17550 was used to haul liquids such as fuel and used on freight trains for many years. Then later on, it was retired and came to be part of the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, where it is seen on display today. What you see right behind me is Chicago and Northwestern 7409. Chicago and Northwestern 7409 was built by Pullman in 1915 and is a combine car. It is one of 5 open platform steel combination cars that were numbered from 7407 to 7411 when it was delivered in Chicago and Northwestern's then standard yellow and green paint scheme. The interior of the car was finished in oak with cream colored steel ceilings, gas lighting, and a vapor heating system, and the car had its own coal-fired heater. In 1922 to 1923, it received similar improvements, used cup receptacles, full-length emergency brake cords, and safety chains for the side doors. In the next shopping in 1928 or 1929, it was repainted into a simple solid Pullman green exterior paint scheme. Sometime during the 1920s, one seat was removed from each car, reducing the seating capacity to 58. Between 1930 and 1933, it received the largest upgrade: strengthened end platforms, new cup holders, first aid kits, a new 2-steam train line for heating stretchers and boxes for them, hose racks, and new style weather stripping for the window sash. In 1928, this car had received a similar modification where the coach compartment was divided with a partition into 2 sections, a 12-seat smoking section and a 46-seat passenger section. Then it was suited for branch line service where a minimum of seating capacity was needed. In the 1950s, it was used in service on the Chicago and Northwestern South Dakota lines. Then the car was retired, and in 1962 it was sold to the Empire State Railway Museum in New York State. Then it was used on the Essex steam train and riverboat in Essex, Connecticut. Then in 1990 it was deemed surplus and put up for sale, and early that year was sold to the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, and also it can even be seen on the passenger train and people riding on board it while visiting the museum. Also, Chicago and Northwestern 7409 is one of two surviving Chicago and Northwestern steel combine cars left in the world today, and 7411 is at the National Railroad Museum in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and 7409 is preserved at the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, where it is today. What you see right behind me is Chicago Northwestern 440. Chicago and Northwestern 440 was built by Pullman in 1929 and is a lounge car. Originally, it was built as a unique salon club car and was named Minnetonka Club, and was used with several similar cars for mid-train lounge service on Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy's overnight Chicago Twin Cities train Blackhawk. As it was built, it featured 4 single bedrooms, 2 compartments, 1 drawing room, and an intimate clubroom with walls finished in walnut paneling. In 1948, it was sold to the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad and renumbered as New York, New Haven, and Hartford 775 and was used as a business car. In 1955, after conversion to a crew car, it was renumbered as New York, New Haven, and Hartford 100. In 1968, the Genesee and Wyoming purchased it and renamed it Edward I, and it was used as a business car. In 1980, it was bought by the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad and was renumbered as Chicago and Northwestern 404 and was rebuilt the interior to its present configuration of 4 bedrooms, a kitchen, dining room, and observation room. The one end of the car was also modified, removing the closed vestibule to fabricate an open platform. In early 1982, the car was reassigned to the mechanical department and renumbered as Chicago and Northwestern 440. Then, the car was soon retired, and in 1983, the car was repainted to Pullman Green and was donated to the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, and the car was named Philip R. Hastings to honor the longtime member and past president. In 2015, it was then repainted to a Chicago Northwestern yellow and green paint scheme, and also it can even be seen on the passenger train and people riding on board it while visiting the museum, and used for the museum's dining service as well. What you see right behind me is Green Bay and Western 49. Green Bay and Western 49 was built by Alco in Schenectady, New York in 1929 and is the 678 19th steam locomotive built by that factory and is a 280 consolidation type steam locomotive. It was assigned to haul fast freight between Kewaunee, Wisconsin and Winona, Minnesota, mainly transporting parts for the Ford Motor Company from Detroit, Michigan to an assembly plant in St. Paul, Minnesota. The train crossed Lake Michigan by car ferry and avoided the congested greater Chicago area. Also, it was built to haul freight when being used on the Green Bay and Western Railroad as well. In 1936, it was renumbered as Green Bay and Western 350 and was downgraded to weigh freight and car ferry loading duties. Then was sold to the Consolidated Water, Power, and Paper Company as Water, Power, and Paper Company 350 and was holding the local freight between Winona and Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin, and Consolidated Water, Power, and Paper Company, a leading manufacturer of high quality coated paper, and also the tender sides were cut down to improve visibility during switching duties. Then in 1957, the locomotive was retired and was donated to the city of Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin, and was on display at the Wisconsin Rapids Municipal Zoo. Then, in 1981, it was then donated to be part of the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, where it is preserved today. Also, Green Bay and Western 49 is the only remaining Green Bay and Western steam locomotive left in the world today and can be found here on display at the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, where it is today. What you see right behind me is John Morrel Company 7. John Morrel Company 7 was built by Alco in Schenectady, New York in 1944 and is the 728/49th diesel locomotive built by that factory and is an Alco S1 type diesel locomotive. This locomotive was used originally for the John Morrel Company, which was a meat packing company and was used for shunting cars around in and out of the facility as well. Then later it was sold to the Association of American Railroads and was assigned to the Chicago office. Then in 1996 it was donated to Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, and also it is sometimes seen hauling the museum train as well. What you see right behind me is the Chicago and Northwestern Rock Springs Depot. The Chicago and Northwestern Rock Springs Depot was built in 1894 and was originally located in Rock Springs, Wisconsin. The town was known as Abelman after Stephen Van Rensselaer Abelman, who settled there in 1851, and the railroad has been a major influence on the village's growth. Also, it was once served by the Chicago Northwestern Railroad. The depot is where people would even buy their tickets inside and also board a train to going somewhere or arriving on a train from somewhere coming in and out of Rock Springs, Wisconsin, and was next to the railroad tracks that are now used by Union Pacific. And in 1965, the building was donated to the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, and was carefully restored to its Chicago and Northwestern paint scheme. Inside, it houses the ticket office and gift shop and waiting room. There is a covered freight loading area attached to the north end of the building. Also, when the museum grounds had a flood from the Baraboo River, you would have thought that the platform looked a bit like a boat dock instead of a passenger train platform, but it still is, but then the flood lifted as well. What you see right behind me is Chicago and Northwestern 10. Chicago and Northwestern 10 was built around the 1800s and is a boxcar. This car was built for 36-inch gauge rails. It had been used on the narrow gauge Chicago and Northwestern line and used for hauling cargo on board, such as wooden barrels, and was one such boxcar of the fleet, and it possibly was built before the turn of the century. Most likely, it was brought to the Dinky New, as the Chicago Northwestern didn't import second-hand equipment until 1910. It is known the boxcars were used to haul ice in the winter for storage in Fenimore, Wisconsin, when the Dinky was abandoned in 1926. Several pieces of equipment were sold to local citizens for use as storage sheds. Chicago and Northwestern 10 was one such survivor. Then the car was retired and it sat on a farm until 1970, when it was donated to the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, and was cosmetically restored. And the trucks are not original to the car, but a scrapped snowplow from another Midwest narrow gauge railroad, which was the Bellevue and Cascade Railroad of Iowa, and had acted as a donor for the trucks. Also, this car can be seen on display at the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, where it can be seen today. You can see right here, this is a hand car that was built for like the Chicago Northwestern Railroad, it looks like. And also, it is seen on display here at the museum. As you can see, these tracks tell you it's narrow, and this track and that track right there tell you it's standard gauge, and you could tell that the wheels on the boxcar behind me is off a bit. But yeah, this is why this handcar was made to run on standard gauge, and this boxcar was made to run on narrow gauge, and seen displayed right here at the museum. What you see right behind me is Union Tank Line 12283. Union Tank Line 11283 was built by Lima Locomotive and Machine Company in Lima, Ohio in 1907 and is a tanker car. Union Tank Line 12283 was used to haul liquid such as fuel and used on freight trains for many years. Then later on it was retired and came to be part of the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, where it is seen on display today. What you see right behind me is Wisconsin Fish Commission 2. Wisconsin Fish Commission 2 was built by Pullman in 1913 and is an aquarium car. Also, this car is named Badger. This car was originally built for the Wisconsin Fish Commission as Wisconsin Fish Commission 2, and it was designed with a steel underframe and fitted with steel tanks to carry fish to remote locations around the state of Wisconsin to restock streams and rivers. The car would be stopped on a bridge and the tanks emptied into the water below. Then the car was sold to equipment dealer W.H. Knapp and renumbered as W.H. Knapp 104 and repainted yellow and red. Then the car was retired, and in 1960 it was sold to the Mid-Continent Railway Museum and had been restored to its 1913 look and was the very first car to be bought by the museum. In 1962, it was moved to Hillsboro, Wisconsin to carry passengers for the first time for the first operating season, actually. And in 1963, then on to North Freedom, Wisconsin in 1963. And also today it can be seen on display at the museum where it is preserved today. What you see right behind me is Duluth, South Shore, and Atlantic 996. Duluth, South Shore, and Atlantic 996 was built in 1899 and is a gondola car. This car was believed to have been originally numbered as Duluth, South Shore, and Atlantic 1854. Then, in 1920, it was renumbered as Duluth, South Shore, and Atlantic 996. Also, it was used on freight trains for many years, and also was used to haul cargo like coal and gravel and other types of cargo it may have hauled years ago. Then, the car was retired, and in 1964 it was donated to the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, and it had been restored by museum volunteers in 1988 for the Sioux Line Historical and Technical Society's convention that was held in North Freedom, Wisconsin. It was used in service on the museum's freight train during snow train and autumn color weekends in the early 1990s and was retired from active service in 1994. Today, it is on display in the coach shed as well. What you see right behind me is Duluth, Mesabi, and Arm Range 7122. Duluth, Mesabi, and Iron Range 7122 was built by the Peatler Car Company in Minneapolis, Minnesota in 1912 and is a reefer. Originally, it was numbered as Duluth and Iron Range 8022, and also it was used on the Duluth and Iron Range Railroad on freight trains on a line of reefers, and also it was used to haul potatoes from the Iron Range area to market. It actually performed a reverse function in keeping the product warm from the freezing climate of the northern Minnesota, where Duluth and Iron Range operated. Then, in 1938, after the consolidation of Duluth and Iron Range and Duluth, Mesabi, and Northern, it was renumbered as Duluth, Mesabi, and Iron Range 7122. Then, in 1957, it was retired and it was acquired by the Lake Superior Museum of Transportation in Duluth, Minnesota, and remained in storage in Duluth, Minnesota. Then, in 1998, it was bought by the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, and was restored to its Duluth, Mesabi, and Iron Range appearance and seen on display in the coach shed as well. What you see right behind me is Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific 17772. Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific 17772 was built by the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific shops in Chicago, Illinois in 1940 and is an outbraced wooden caboose. Originally, it was built as an outbraced wooden boxcar as Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific 4867, which was built by the Bettendorf Company of Bettendorf, Iowa. Then later it was rebuilt as a wooden caboose, and it is part of the number series from 17765 to 17784. It features a baggage room section with sliding side doors similar to a baggage car. Also, it was used as the train crew's office for many years and also was used on the back of freight trains for the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad as well. Then it was retired, and in 1967 it was sold to a noted rail photographer and member of Mid-Continent Railway Museum, Dr. Philip R. Hastings, in Albert Lea, Minnesota. Then it was moved to the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, and also today it is used as a bunk facility as well. You can see right behind us Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western 557. Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western 557 was built by Pullman in 1914 and is a Boonton-type passenger coach. This car was part of an order of 77 cars built for the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad. All of the cars featured unique I-beam platform roof supports at each end, which earned them the nickname Boontons, as they were a familiar sight along the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western's Boonton branch through Boonton, New Jersey. Also, it was used in commuter service on the railroad as well, and passengers riding aboard it as well. Then later it was retired, and in 1963 it was brought over to the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, and also it can even be seen on the passenger train and people riding on board it while visiting the museum as well. What you see right behind me is Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western 425. Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western 425 was built by Pullman in 1917 and is a Boonton-type combine car. This car was part of an order of 77 cars built for the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad. Also, it has a baggage compartment and a passenger compartment, as it's known as a combine car as well. All of the cars featured unique I-beam platform roof supports at each end, which earned them the nickname Boontons, as they were a familiar sight along the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western's Boonton branch through Boonton, New Jersey. Also, it was used in commuter service on the railroad as well, and passengers riding aboard it as well. Then it was soon retired and was purchased by an individual and brought to North Freedom, Wisconsin, along with 3 other Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western coaches, and then in 1972 it was bought by the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, and it sat in storage for many years until purchased by the museum in 1992, and in 1993 it was back in service, and also it can even be seen on the passenger train and people riding on board it while visiting the museum as well. United States Army 1256 was built by Baldwin Lima Hamilton Whitcomb in Eddystone, Pennsylvania in 1954 and is the 612 11th diesel locomotive built by that factory and is an RS4TC type diesel locomotive. It was originally built for the United States Army and Air Force and was delivered to Sharp Ammo Depot in Lathrop, California, and placed in storage. Later used at Detroit Tank Plant, it was rebuilt by Construction and Mine Services, Teed Annex, in 1986. The rebuild incorporated a 500 HP Caterpillar 3508 diesel engine, new electrical gear, and roller bearing axles. The new RS4TC A1 class locomotive worked at Hill Air Force Base in Utah until transferred to Badger Army Ammunition Plant near Baraboo, Wisconsin, sometime between 1991 and 1994. Then, in September 2006, the Army decided to dispose of the locomotive and allow it to be shipped to the Mid-Continent Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, until its final disposition was known, and it arrived at the museum and was purchased by members and friends of the museum at auction and donated it to the museum, and also it is sometimes seen operating on the museum's tracks and pulling the museum's train as well. Well, I hope you all enjoyed learning about trains with me today in Matthew Lapp Train Guy segment show. Also, I hope to see you all again in the next segment. So this is Matthew Lapp